What's up, everybody? Welcome to The Sweat. We've got you for the better part of the next hour. We thank you for joining us. I'm Adam Kaufman. We've got a great crew coming up to help analyze, of course, all the daily fantasy and sports betting trends you need to be aware of. Looking ahead to a busy night and even ahead to the weekend with, of course, football on the way. We're down to the final four teams. We got a lot to cover. Returning stars, guys sitting out, big matchups, all of it. But before we dive into any of that, want to break down, of course, what is in store. DraftKings is offering, as you should well know by now, a shot at becoming a millionaire come Sunday. $3.5 million fantasy football millionaire contest. You can draft your team from the remaining four playoff teams and take your shot at the $1 million top prize with a $3.5 million total prize pouch or purse, if you will. It's just $20 to enter. You can go check that out in the DraftKings lobby right now. While you do, we can bring in these gentlemen to, of course, help you build those lineups. Our great panel of experts from DraftKings contributors, Piers Dietrich, Matt Meiselman, and, of course, Steve Buchanan. Guys, what's going on? Obviously, it's good to see you. Good to have you here with us. Little NFL price check. And when I think price check, I think Piers Dietrich. So, Piers, we're going to start with you here, dive into first look at salaries for the NFL Championship Series that is on the way, obviously, in just a few days. Patrick Mahomes, understandably, is the top-priced quarterback, top-priced guy in general at $7,400. You got Joe Burrow, you got Matt Stafford, you got Jimmy Garoppolo. I think it's pretty safe to say most of these are not like the rest. Mahomes really in a class of his own. Do you need to spend up, though? Do you need to spend that salary on Mahomes, or is it more enticing maybe to pay down and pay up elsewhere?
Where's the respect for Joe Burrow? I mean, Mahomes is good, but these other guys are pretty good too. They've gotten to the championship games, and if you want to win that $1 million pouch, you should probably play Joe Burrow in this game. He got sacked 9 times and still threw for 344 yards. The numbers against Las Vegas weren't great, 244, but that was a conservative approach. They had the lead for all of that game. They weren't really playing against a high-powered offense. Well, just look back to the last time they played a high-powered offense, which was Kansas City, and Burrow threw for 446 yards and 4 touchdowns. The week before that, 525 yards and 4 touchdowns. And the kicker is his receivers and his pass catchers are all really cheap. It's very easy to stack the Bengals. I don't see why you don't.
Matt, do you have a good reason why you don't?
Well, I think that a lot of people are going to do that. I think Mahomes will probably be the top-owned quarterback for GPPs, and I think Jamar Chase will probably be the top receiver. So this is not going to be a sneaky strategy. That's really the only reason, though. Like, Mahomes definitely deserves to be the highest-priced quarterback, and I think Burrow deserves to be the second most expensive quarterback. But I think going to the other game is reasonable because those guys are – it's another tier to Stafford and Garoppolo, but I don't think the drop-off is very significant. I think it's a little bit of a drop-off. And I think we could have a game where Burrow does turn the ball over, the Chiefs get up big, and then the other game ends up being a shootout and Stafford and Garoppolo are better. So as like a tournament pivot, I think there's plenty of reason to not play Mahomes, even though he does deserve to be the top quarterback, and I think that game probably will have more points.
Well, Steve, it's easy to make the case if you're just focused on differentiation above all else. Sure, go to Jimmy G, go to Garoppolo, because obviously he's not going to be nearly as owned as all those other guys. It's just, I think it's also pretty easy to argue he doesn't have the ceiling that the others do, at least offensively. Statistically, he doesn't do it week in and week out. So where would you lean?
Would you build a lineup with Jimmy Garoppolo?
Well, I mean, if I want to be different from everybody else and chasing $1 million, I mean, how else are you going to beat tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people? Maybe you need to.
No, you don't.
I'll send Steve a screenshot of my Garoppolo lineup. Just
there
to be clear.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt, because I guarantee you there won't be a screenshot to send, okay? So you just calm down right now. Let me tell you, quiet, Matt. You've had your time. You don't talk about Jimmy Garoppolo in a positive manner on this show, okay? Not necessary. Joe Burrow, all right? Jimmy B, he's a hunk, all right? You know who's one of the best quarterbacks against man coverage this season? It was Joe Burrow. Guess who runs a lot of man coverage? The Chiefs. Why do you think he threw for almost 500 yards in that game? Because Joe Burrow absolutely slices and dices man coverage. On the season, he averaged 9.2 yards per pass attempt. That was the best in the league during the regular season. In zone coverage, 8.7 yards per attempt. One of the best in the league. Joe Burrow is going to be able to do what he did to the Chiefs before and absolutely slice them up and have one of those monster games that we've seen already this season. That offensive line's got to do something. I don't know if they don't like Joe Burrow or something. You got to do a better job at covering your quarterback. That is the only reason you are as far as you are is with Joe Burrow. So do a better job at covering him. But seriously, this is such a good matchup for Joe Burrow. Obviously, Mahomes is in a class of itself. What's Jimmy Garoppolo doing here? It's kind of funny. Why are you here? But Joe Burrow, that's the guy you want to be targeting this week.
All right, Bukes, let's stay with you since you love these Bengals as much as you do. Could you make just as good a case for a Joe Mixon and paying up for him as you could for Joe Burrow and obviously the matchup that he's got? Mixon's coming off of nearly 23 fantasy points, and of course that divisional round sets up well. He was just as active in the passing game as he was out of the backfield. Is he going to deliver again here at $6,800?
Yeah, look, Mixon hasn't been overly effective, really in the second half of the season. Like you look at some of his games, like he's getting the carries for sure, but it's not like he's gaining a lot of yards on the ground when he's getting those carries. So I'm not exactly looking at Joe Mixon at 6,800. I feel like he's a little bit overpriced. Like there's not like a clear-cut RB1 that you need to put into your lineups this week. A lot of the, star running backs are out. This is not exactly a team that have strong running backs. Like, I'd probably go with Mitchell, even though the game script is most likely not going to be in his favor, but they love going to him, man. And they're trying to mask Jimmy Garoppolo as much as possible because guess what? He stinks. Okay. So they want to run it with Mitchell. That's why even in a game, that was as close as it was, still had 17 carries, had a handful of targets. Jimmy really can't throw at this point. And when he is throwing, it's basically going to go for a pick six at this point. So they want to avoid the pick six as much as possible. So by doing that, you go with Eli Mitchell, 5,900. I think that's the guy you roll with this week.
All right. So, Matt, while you're obviously quarterbacking Jimmy Garoppolo, are you paying up for Joe Mixon then since you got all this extra salary to burn?
Well, to be clear, I do like Matt Stafford more than Jimmy Garoppolo. I just think that game is going to go overlooked. But if you're going that route, you do have extra money to spend. And the way I see the slate breaking down is that a lot of people are going to want to play Burrow, Mahomes, and the passing games there. And Joe Mixon, as the most expensive running back, I think could be only the fourth most popular running back because he is overpriced. Like, there's no question about that. So my answer is Joe Mixon worth paying up for? No, in the sense that he's too expensive, but yes, in the sense that I think a lot of people won't do it. And at least the one selling point that Mixon has going for him that's different than the rest of the season is over the last 4 games, he's averaging 6.5 targets. So they are using him in the passing game. And I actually do think it's perfectly viable to play a Bengals stack with Joe Burrow that also has Joe Mixon in it because Mixon has become more of an important piece of the passing game over recent games.
And what the heck? Maybe Jamar Chase. Load it up, Pierce. What do you think?
No, I'm not going to go with Mixon. I get the strategy point of it. If last week was a bad running back slate, then obviously this week's going to be worse with the same teams and fewer teams to pick from. So Jerick McKinnon is where I will go back. I know Edwards-Helaire came back last week, but Ad Levitan tweeted out a comparison between the two, and McKinnon outsnapped him 53-23, ran more routes 41-11, out-touched him. Even if Edwards-Helaire is a little bit more healthy this week and gets a bigger role, we could see McKinnon still easily reach value. I don't see why they would lower his role in this matchup. Maybe Reid does. But either way, even if he's simply just the pass-catching back, that's a good matchup against Cincinnati, who are 27th against receiving running backs, allowed the 5th most receptions to receiving running backs, 6th most in yards. The AFC game is just simply where you have to target, especially for the value.
Pierce, it's no surprise that Cooper Kupp obviously is as expensive as he is. It maybe was a surprise he was left as wide open as he was at the end of that game to set up the winner against Tampa to advance his team to the conference championship. Is there any universe in which you could fade Cooper Kupp coming off a game where he had damn near 200 yards?
Can you give some of these guys some respect? I mean, maybe he got open on his own. Maybe he earned those 200 yards, Kaufman. I don't know. It seems like he's been doing a lot on his own this season. Yeah, you roster Kupp if you can afford him, always. But the guy I'd take first is Jamar Chase. He is cheaper, and I don't know if he's just as good, but from the fantasy perspective, he's in a better fantasy environment. We just saw this game. There's mountains of evidence. You just trust your eyes. You play Jamar Chase. The burden of proof isn't defending this pick. It's defending why you don't pick him. And the only flimsy argument is going to be that he's going to be really heavily owned. And so, sure, fade the best player on the slate, and you can lose some money.
Ukes at $8,800. I mean, do you just have? Sometimes you got to eat the chalk. Is this one of those situations?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, the only reason that you're going to fade Kupp is that you can tell that we're stretched for questions because it's a 2-game slate. We're talking about if we're going to fade Cooper Kupp or not. But the only reason that we're going to do this is that if you feel that one of these more expensive guys can outperform Cooper Kupp, and thus you're in a better position than everyone else? Is that guy Deebo Samuel? Is that guy Tyreek Hill? Is it Jamar Chase? It could be one of those guys. But you're talking about fading somebody who has at least 7 targets every game this season, somebody that's gone over 100 receiving yards multiple times this season, somebody that is damn near uncoverable at this point, and now going up against the San Francisco 49ers, who, to be fair, limited him to 7 catches and 118 yards and a touchdown the last time those teams played. Okay, this is the type of player we're talking about. So at this point, I'm just like, I don't care. I'll just, eat the chalk here. Maybe I'll throw some dope in there that I have no, reason to put in there, and that will be like my play to differentiate myself. But at this point, like, you're not fading Cooper Kupp unless you have some strong lean, and I'd love to hear what that lean is, that Cooper Kupp's not going to have a good game against the 49ers.
Matt, any way you can present us with that strong lean elsewhere?
Well, I do think Cooper Kupp deserves to be by far the most expensive receiver, but I don't think being contrarian is really the only reason to fade him. The other reason is just he is really expensive on a slate where we don't have value plays. And there's a scenario where Kupp scores 25 points and Deebo scores 25 and Tyreek Hill scores 25 and Jamar Chase maybe even scores more than that. So if you love this Bengals and Chiefs game and that game's a shootout, you may not be able to fit Cooper Kupp in the lineup. Like the real reason that I'm getting to here is there are so many good wide receivers on this slate, and Cooper Kupp is the best one. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's definitely the best one here, but between Samuel, Hill, Chase, even T. Higgins, like, there are a lot of good choices. So I think ultimately you probably play Cooper Kupp, but I think there are at least reasons to consider other guys because this is just such a strong slate for wide receiver.
Tight end position's interesting, obviously. We've got a couple of the bigger names in the NFL that still remain. You've got, of course, Travis Kelce, George Kittle. They're the top 2 guys. Kelce's $1,500 more than Kittle, though, which is obviously something to consider here. And then you've got, potential salary savings, a Tyler Higby. You've got CJ Uzomah. I mean, you were just saying here, Matt, that there's no real value on this slate. Maybe you mean at receiver, maybe you mean in general. What do you think of these guys?
Yeah, my lean here is that Travis Kelce is only going to be the 3rd most popular tight end. And for that reason, like, I think that he becomes easily my favorite. CJ Uzomah is 3,400 and he's the most underpriced guy for sure. Like, he's a focal point in a good offense that's going to have to pass a lot. Most likely the Bengals are going to be throwing. And then George Kittle's only 5,000. And with Deebo Samuel banged up, I think it's going to be a pretty common move for people to say Deebo's a little bit hurt, Kittle will take over. So Kelce is priced up, and it's just going to be hard to afford him. So I'll say Uzomah is the best value, but I think Kelce makes the most sense as a tournament play. And obviously Kelce's a great player who can score a ton of points in any week.
Pierce, are we, not giving Travis Kelce the proper respect here?
Yeah, you're giving Kelce enough respect, I suppose. He'll be fine if you can afford him. That's a way to get contrarian. But if you're going to pay up at receiver and quarterback, then you've got to cut somewhere, and it's going to be tight end. It's going to be Uzomah. It's going to be the popular play. I'd like the AFC game. We're going to see more scoring. We're going to see more passing. That's where the action is. San Francisco's not a good offense, and they're playing a good defense. I don't want to roster them. LA is inconsistent, and they're playing a good defense. I don't really want to go there. Uzomah, 6 catches, 64 yards 2 weeks ago. Last week, 7 catches for 71 yards, 6 or more targets in 6 of the last 8 games. You saw last week with that pass rush, getting sacked 9 times. Burrow was checking down a lot to Uzomah. He'll see plenty of action. I don't know if he'll explode, but he saves you some money.
What do you think, Bukes?
Yeah, one of the guys that hasn't even brought up is Tyler Higby at 3,700. Like, he's not getting into the end zone as of late, but since he's returned to the lineup in week 16, has at least 6 targets in 4 of those 5 games. Like, Stafford is going to him. He's moving the ball around to all different receivers in this offense. I know it's a crowded offense, so there's a little bit of, worry there, but at least Higby is getting the targets and he's getting the yards too as well. The DraftKings fantasy points aren't showing that, but because he has less than 10 points in 3 of those 5 games. But at the same time, if he's getting that type of volume and then he does get into the end zone, that's where you're really going to get the value here for somebody who's only 3,700, especially with Uzomah going to be the more popular play. Higby's only $200 more. So if you want to differentiate yourself a little bit, Higby might be the way to do that at tight end.
Bukes, we may be stretched for questions, but we do have one more we got to get in. We got to be fast with all of you for it. And that's the top value play here in the championship round. Of course, Gabe Davis last week, value play among value plays, $4,600. Guy went north of 50 points. Who's it going to be this week, Bukes?
Yeah, Cam Akers, 5,000, 41 carries in the 2 weeks he's been back. 5K, that's a joke. Give me Cam Akers.
Pierce?
Byron Pringle, 7 targets or more in 4 of the last 5 games. Cincinnati ranks 27th against wide receiver number 2.
Who you got, Matt?
Well, I don't know if anyone cheap is going over 50 fantasy points, but I do think Tyler Boyd is worth considering. I like Pringle, Pierce just said, so I'll pick a different guy. I think Boyd in that same game is cheap also and definitely on the field enough to have a big day.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. All right, more football talk on the way. Let's get to basketball. That is next. Stay with us here on The Sweat.
Okay.
Everybody, we are back here on The Sweat. And of course, it is time to hit the hardwood. A 9-gamer on a Tuesday. You love to see it. RotoWire's Nick Whalen joins us. Gary and Thorne, of course, DraftKings contributor. And guys, what we need to find in terms of the lineup building, people out there chasing big cash, is where do they load up? At what position? Who are the best guys? I've got my thoughts, but I mean, let's be honest, we're here for yours. So let's start at the guard position. Gary, start us off. Who do you like best?
Well, I'm going to preface this by saying that Luka Doncic is in a fantastic spot. Anytime he's less than 11K, I think you have to seriously consider investing. I think CJ McCollum is underpriced considering what his role is, what the script potentially is in that Portland, Minnesota game. But it is a day that ends in Y. Nick Whalen is here. Let's talk about Deshante Murray at $10,000. Deshante Murray is maybe the best dollar-for-dollar play on this entire slate. And you really don't have to look farther than one particular stat, and that is San Antonio has the highest implied team total on this slate by a super wide margin. It is not particularly close between them and second place, which is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and that is because the Houston Rockets are an atrocious defensive team. They are giving up the second most DraftKings points per game to opposing point guards. Murray, across his last 7 games, is averaging over 1.5 DraftKings points per minute. And that game that started this run 7 games ago was against this very same Houston Rockets team. He went off for 73.5 DraftKings points. So I think you just slot Deshante Murray in at the point guard spot and don't give it too much thought.
Nick, that's exactly the guy that I was going to bring up. You could also look at his teammate, Derek White, very easily. He's in a terrific spot tonight for the Spurs as well. Who stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have to do my obligatory Deshante Murray spiel. $10,000 for a guy who was priced, significantly less than that the last few years. It seems kind of weird for him to be in that same range as Luka and the other elite guards. But that's the player that he's become this season. I mean, he's 1 rebound short of entering this game with 3 straight triple doubles. But as Gary alluded to, I mean, it's partially, our love for Deshante Murray, but it's more about this matchup against Houston. Going up against a backcourt of Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., that's the, kind of the duality of guys who don't try on defense and also don't have the bodies to stay in front of anybody. Houston is the worst defense in the league by a fair margin over the last 10 games. These teams played a couple weeks ago and combined for 252 points in that one. Everything is lining up for this to be a huge Deshante Murray night. And, there are a couple other Spurs, I think, that we'll talk about later on who stand out to me as potential values. So, a lot of potential, I think, in this Spurs and Rockets matchup tonight.
Well, and that's the thing, Nick, again, between Murray, Derek White, who I mentioned, we go to the forward position now, and not to sit here and tell you to stack the Spurs, but telling you to stack the Spurs, you have Devin Vassell, you have, Keldon Johnson, they're in great spots.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you really like at forward?
Yeah, Vassell's somebody I had in my value section, which we'll get to in a little bit. He's at $4,200, so a player who's pretty easy to slide into just about any lineup build tonight. I think even Doug McDermott has some upside as another cheap forward. But if you're going to pay up, I really don't have a problem, shelling out $11,100 for LeBron James at this point. Not much to say as far as how consistent he's been. The Nets are 29th in the league in defense over their last 10 games. Obviously, no Kevin Durant, no Kyrie Irving tonight. Should just kind of be the James Harden show. I don't know how that game's going to play out. These are two teams that I think have kind of stopped caring on the defensive end. Pascal Ciaco, I think, is in a good spot, against Charlotte tonight. He's usually a good bet to be in the high 40s, low 50s, just about every night. And a big reason for that is he's still playing, 37 to 42 minutes. It seems like, 9 out of 10 games as Nick Nurse uses that short rotation. And then the last guy I'll throw out at forward, Tobias Harris, 7,400 against New Orleans. I think we're maybe reaching Tobias Harris is now slightly underrated territory. We're starting to talk about him as like one of the worst contracts in the league. They're trying to lump him into a Ben Simmons trade. He's still not that bad. He's a borderline all-star player. He's essentially the guy that he's been for the last 8 years. Recently 39, 43, 42 DraftKings points in his last 3 games. The complaint with Tobias Harris is he does not have a super high ceiling, either in fantasy or in real life, but still a guy who has a really nice floor at $7,400.
See, and that's the guy, Tobias Harris, Gary, and is the one that I was sitting here just waiting for one of you to mention. I guess I should just shout out Cork Miles instead because he's in a good spot too, sticking with the Sixers teammate. Who do you like at forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same guys that Nick was talking about. I don't want to play the hits too much here. We already talked about Deshante Murray, but yeah, Pascal Siakam at $8,900. Someone who's playing over 40 minutes per game across his last 8 games. And we already know that a matchup with the Charlotte Hornets tends to be like fantasy Nas. Like they have the highest pace of play in the Eastern Conference. They are not particularly good defensively. So you take that level of volume, combine it with the level of volume of being one of Nick Nurse's starting players. Seems like a pretty explosive combination. I'll also mention Anthony Edwards, I think, is in a really interesting spot tonight. Just in general, that Portland-Minnesota game should be relatively high scoring, should be relatively high paced. And Edwards is someone who, yes, hasn't been playing his best basketball the past week, but he's also seen his salary go from $8,600 last Tuesday to $7,600 tonight. That's a pretty precipitous drop in a short period of time for someone who literally 2.5 weeks ago had scored at least 40 DraftKings points in 5 of his last 6 games. So I just think the ceiling is really high for Edwards, and this is kind of a get-right spot for him with his salary dipping pretty low.
For all the talk before, Gary, and about that San Antonio-Houston game, what about a Christian Wood and Jakob Poeltl showdown at center?
I got no problem playing any Spur, really. But I think the whole point of this slate is to try to find enough money to stick Nikola Jokic in at center. Hopefully beside Deshante Murray, if you can muster it, and maybe the Spurs can help get you there. But, I think the only thing that was surprising about the Denver-Detroit game on Sunday was that Jokic didn't finish with a triple-double. He still got to 62 DraftKings points, but this is someone who across his last 4 games is averaging over 1.8 DraftKings points per minute. And the beautiful thing from a DFS perspective about Denver is they're so bad when Jokic isn't on the court that you never really have to worry about blowout potential. We talked last week about Golden State going up against Detroit, and it was, I don't know if the starters are going to play enough minutes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Denver does not blow teams out because they are arguably the worst roster in the NBA when Jokic is not available. So I think we see another relatively close game like we saw on Sunday. And I think the only difference this time for Jokic is he probably does end up with a triple-double. So I'm going to find a way to get Jokic into lineups.
You guys were just looking at those numbers. The fact this guy is averaging 60 fantasy points per, and of course is projected for something similar here tonight. So Nick, I mean, it's not just Joker, obviously. I mean, you got Joel Embiid, you got Karl Anthony Towns, you got Yusuf Nurkic is available. You mentioned Pascal Siakam before. Who do you like?
Yeah, I mean, Jokic versus Embiid is becoming a real debate night to night with how well Embiid is playing, but I still trust Jokic, even though you're paying up. Both those guys have decent matchups tonight, but Jokic going up against Detroit, 27th in defense over the last 10 games are the Detroit Pistons. Isaiah Stewart, a big who's pretty prone to getting into foul trouble. But like Arian said, I mean, that's a great point that when Jokic is off the court, they're so bad. When's the last time like you've really worried about Nikola Jokic not getting to 32, 33 minutes? It just doesn't happen. And it's kind of rare for a guy who has that kind of statistical upside to never really be in danger of a blowout. So it's a really good point. I will say I would not chance it tonight on Anthony Davis, who is expected to make his return. He's listed at $9,800. I don't know who is putting Anthony Davis into a lineup tonight and feeling really good about that at that price. If you want to save a little bit of money or maybe even, throw this guy in a utility spot and play Jokic or play Embiid, I'm going to go once again back to that Houston-San Antonio game and go Jakob Poeltl at 6,400. Again, Houston is the worst defense in the league. That's the case over the last 10 games as well. They really have no trustworthy big men outside of Christian Wood. I mean, Daniel Tice is essentially out of the rotation. Şengün only plays 12 to 14 minutes. And Christian Wood, obviously not a great defender. I mean, his impact comes on the offensive end. And Poeltl has 51, 39, 38, and 50 DraftKings points over his last 4 games. He's played almost 70 minutes in the last 2 games combined. That's not always the case for him. So I think a lot to like about Jakob Poeltl against that Houston Rockets front line.
Let's go to value, guys, and Nick, we'll stay with you here. There's a fair amount of it, actually. You guys were both talking about the ability to pay up for guys like Joker or Murray or both of them, and the way to do that, Gary said it before, is load up on some Spurs. You got a lot of value Spurs available to you tonight. Who do you like best at value?
Yeah, I mean, you can load up on Devin Vassell, who's a Spur, who I mentioned earlier. You can load up on a former Spur, Patty Mills, who's at 4,900 against the Lakers. He's the de facto number 2 option this week with no Durant and no Kyrie Irving. I actually kind of like Rashawn Holmes. I don't love the matchup against the Boston team that has several big men to throw at him, but the price, I mean, 4,600 for Rashawn Holmes. And I know he's, still kind of not returned to being himself since the injury and since the COVID absence, but 4,600 for a guy with that kind of upside to me is a pretty good deal. And then if you want to go super cheap, for some reason I like Nemanja Bjelica. I can't really explain it. He's at 3,300 tonight. Started to kind of eat into Jonathan Kuminga's minutes these last few games with Draymond Green out. Not going to be a guy who carries you to victory necessarily, but if you need to plug someone in for 3,300, Bjelica is my guy.
How about you, Garion?
Yeah, I think one game we haven't talked about yet that could turn out to be fruitful, we have to wait for an injury report, is the Pelicans. I mean, if Brandon Ingram is going to miss his 2nd consecutive game, and I mean, I'm not in the know by any means, but I would think that someone with Ingram's track record for injury, 2nd night of a back-to-back, he missed the 1st game. I'm going to lean that he's probably not playing tonight. I'm sure he'll end up being listed as questionable, and we'll have to sweat it a little bit. But if Ingram doesn't play, we saw the Pelicans run a pretty tight rotation on Monday against the Pacers, and that kind of opens up the potential to use 2 different guys. I prefer Alexander Walker. I think he just has a higher upside than most of the Pelicans' sort of secondary, tertiary wing players. He just loves to shoot it. He is a high volume shooter. He's someone who went off for over 30 DraftKings points, played 34 minutes off the bench in that win over the Pacers. But you could also stick Garrett Temple into a lineup at 3,300. Maybe more of a cash game play than he's a GPP play. But I think both those guys are viable. I would lean towards Alexander Walker at 3.7 because, again, I just think he has that higher ceiling. But both guys are very viable if Brandon Ingram does end up not playing in this game.
I'm going to mention a name just because we haven't for people to think about. Cameron Thomas for Brooklyn tonight. Consider it. Sub 4K. He's in a good spot. Guys, before we get you out of here, we need your slate-approved pick. Gary, and you go first. Favorite sportsbook play?
Yeah. I'm going to go against my heart here and take the Charlotte Hornets plus 3.5 in Toronto. not really much of a home court advantage in Toronto right now. Still no fans in the stands at Scotiabank Arena. The Raptors have looked pretty sluggish their last couple of games in Toronto with no fans, and Charlotte has just been incredible as of late on the road. They are 6-1 ATS their last 7 road games. They are 4-0 ATS their past 4 times as an underdog. And Toronto's also been just pretty bad offensively. Their last 7 games, they have the lowest true shooting percentage in the NBA by a pretty wide margin. So they just seem to be slumping right now, where Charlotte has really been quite good. So I'll take the points.
Nick, your turn.
Yeah, I like that call. Charlotte's starting to look a little bit better, at least by their standards, on defense. I'm going to go to the Dallas Golden State game. I like the Mavs plus 3.5 tonight at Golden State. I just don't really trust this Golden State team without Draymond Green. And we'll see if Klay Thompson comes back. He's having a little bit of an issue with that surgically repaired left knee. The Warriors just have not been the team, I think, that their reputation has belied, a reputation that they built over those first 15 or 20 games of the season. Golden State is 27th in offensive rating over the last 10 games. Steph Curry remains in a prolonged slump that dates all the way back essentially to Thanksgiving. And meanwhile, Dallas is playing arguably the best basketball in the NBA right now. Over their last 10 games, they're first in defense. They're second in net rating. Luka Doncic is kind of doing his usual second half turn on, maybe going to work his way back into the MVP race. I think this is a good spot for Dallas to take advantage of a Golden State team that seems to have lost its identity just a little bit.
All right, boys, thank you very much. Should be fun. Again, a 9-gamer in the NBA tonight. Lots to consider, but what to do in the NHL? We'll find out when we come back halfway home here on The Sweat. What's up, everyone? Thanks for being with us here on The Sweat. It's time for a little puck talk, and we've got a trio of guys. Of course, a couple of line mates from RotoWire, Paul Bruno, of course, AJ Schultz, and we also have the host of the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast, Pete Jensen. Fellas, great to see you, obviously, and this should be a good time. Our little NHL morning skate here, DFS look at tonight's 8-gamer, where Connor McDavid, we alluded to it earlier, is not even the most expensive play available to the people this evening. Let's begin at center, though, and Pete, let's start with you. Starting at that center position again, Connor McDavid is he's not cheap by any means, but he is not the guy that you have to go way up for, obviously. That is the Panthers' Alexander Barkov, who comes in at $9,000 tonight. Do you like either of these guys, or are you paying down?
I totally understand anyone who wants to spend up for those type of guys, but my strategy here in my mock lineup is to spend down a little bit at center from the Florida Panthers, one of the best teams in the league. They face the Winnipeg Jets, and I'm rolling out Sam Bennett. The guy is an absolute stud. Ever since he was traded from the Calgary Flames, he scored 40 points in 42 games since that trade last year, has been a total breakout player. Whether he's playing with his usual line mate, Jonathan Huberdeau, who's tied for the NHL lead in scoring, or even if he's on the second line with like a Sam Reinhart or a Carter Verhaeghe. He's in a great spot. I love the price point, $6,100. And the Winnipeg Jets have failed to live up to expectations this year, fantasy and reality. I think we could all agree on that. They're 0-2-2 in their past 4, and I like Sam Bennett and the Panthers to pounce on them here.
What do you think, AJ? Is there an ideal spot, an ideal pivot off of those top 2 guys like McDavid? Maybe you want to go to his teammate, Leon Draisaitl at center. Who stands out to you?
Guys, this has been absolutely the easiest segment I've ever had to prepare for, because clearly Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin are the guys to use tonight. I mean, look, you're talking about a matchup with the wayward Coyotes, who are second in the league in goals allowed at 3.7, and second worst in penalty kill in the league at just 72.8%. So if you can make it work, which I figured out how to do it, you stack Crosby and Malkin both at the center position. Yeah, they're going to cost you a lot, but you're getting the two best players on the ice. You're getting two parts of what should be just an outstanding power play in this terrific matchup. I don't know why you would look anywhere else. If you're picking between the two, go with Malkin because he's cheaper. He's still only coming in at 6,600, but absolutely both these guys are in play.
See, if I know Paul the way that I know Paul, I feel like he's going to just ignore everybody and say, you know what? Jean-Gabriel Pageau tonight coming. What a spot.
Adam, I love it when AJ uses his pillowcase for his notes, and this was no exception today. That was beautiful. And I'm going to say I'm on the same two guys, but Bennett is a compelling case. I'll give you two more guys to think about. They're playing against each other in the Devils matchup with Dallas. Rupe Hintz, 12 points his last 10 games played, $6,900 the price tag. The guy's on fire. His line mates are right there along with him, one of the hottest lines in the league right now. And Jack Hughes has come up with 15 points in his last 10 games, almost the most productive player at this position over the last 10 outings, and $7,400 is his price tag. So you pick the winning team here, and I think you're going to do well in the totals for the center position. I'm going to say Rupe Hintz is my pick.
Let's stay with you here, Pablo. At wing, you know, it's a little less top heavy, you might say, compared to the guys at the center position we were just talking about. You know, you have the potential return of Max Pacioretty for Vegas, something to think about, obviously looming. He is the most expensive wing on the slate, $8,200. Do you want to do it, though, knowing that he is expected back, or, again, look elsewhere?
I'm looking at Jonathan Huberdeau, the hottest stick on the ice tonight of any player, any team. 17 points in his last 10 games alongside Bennett. That's a line stack waiting to happen for me, I think. One of the two options that I'd be looking at in that regard. I'll touch on the other one later. $8,100 is his price tag. Kyle Connor's on fire with Winnipeg, having a great season. $7,900 his price tag. He's playing against Florida, so his ownership will be low, but he's one of the better shooters in the league and could rise up and bite them tonight. Brady Tkachuk in a game against Buffalo, should be excited about the possibilities for him and their shaky goaltending on the other end of the ice. He only got 5 points in his last 10 games, but I like the fact he's putting a lot of shots on goal and he's blocking a lot as well. So his point total should be high on the DK scoring this evening. And Drake Batherson, his line mate, another compelling case if you want to stack Ottawa tonight too. But going back to the Dallas stack that I really like, Jason Robertson, $6,600 against New Jersey tonight, 16 points in his last 10 games, along with 34 shots on goal. There's a mitt full of information there. I like Robertson the best of the pack.
AJ, anything on the other side of that pillowcase?
Well, I mean, Paul uses up all the time, so I'll just say Jake Gensel and move on here, right? Like 7,500, 13 points in his last 11 games, on set for career highs in both goals and points this season. But if you're sick of my Penguins takes and there's more to come, maybe Matt Duchene at 5,700 going up against Seattle. It's a decent matchup for the Predators here. He's coming off a big game, can be a bit of a streaky player. So maybe, you're expecting a bit of a drop, but I think he can carry on a few more games before we see that signature dip from him.
Pete, I tell you, you're going to have to be the adult in the room with these two just bickering. You're going to be the center. They're the wings. You tell me who stands out.
So I agree with Paul for sure about the Dallas line. I have Jason Robertson in my mock lineup. He's been near a point per game in his NHL career through his first two seasons, and he's been outstanding lately. Like he mentioned, 18 points in his past 12 games. So, definitely get Robertson into your lineup. Couple other injury notes that I wanted to mention. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins could come back for the Oilers. The Oilers are starting to bounce back from that really bad losing streak that they had, and their offensive guys could get going. So keep an eye on Nugent-Hopkins. And then also wanted to mention Blake Wheeler came back over the weekend, had a multi-point game recently. So, and with all of Winnipeg's injuries and missing guys throughout the season, Nikolai Ehlers was moved to IR. So right now, safe to say Blake Wheeler is going to have great lineup placement. I know it's a tough matchup against Florida, but these are some injury trends between Nugent-Hopkins and Blake Wheeler that you should take notice of in all fantasy formats.
All right, let's go to defense and stay with the man with the NHL crest behind him here. And obviously at the top, Roman Josi. He's a guy that we could talk about all the time. He's obviously very expensive. He's very good. You got to pay up, though, for the privilege. Behind him, you have the likes of Pietrangelo. You have Ekblad. You've got Letang as well. Who stands out?
I mean, the Panthers guys are always safe bets for DFS, no question about it. I like, in terms of value, what guys like Rasmus Dahlin bring to the table, especially with Buffalo's power play being borderline top 10 in the NHL since January 1st. So he brings all that exposure to Alex Tuck, and he brings it to Tage Thompson and Jeff Skinner, who's having a bounce back season. So if you can't fit those guys into your price point and you just want to spend up a little bit on defense, Rasmus Dahlin and the Sabres had a nice game last week against Ottawa. So look for them to maybe keep the good times rolling. They also had a big victory over the weekend against the Flyers. So those are some names I'm keeping an eye out for. And I just think Buffalo, since moving on from the Eichel trade and getting some of these bodies back, now they're also going to get Casey Middlestad back. They have a nice little top six right now. And I think the biggest beneficiary is Rasmus Dahlin.
AJ, which direction are you rolling?
Yeah, I'm definitely with Pete here on Rasmus Dahlin at 5,700. He's running that first power play for the Sabres here. And they should, as Pete mentioned, get an offensive boost by having Casey Middlestat return to the lineup tonight. But of course, the answer here is Chris Letang at 7,400. He was on a 10-game point streak before Sunday's matchup in Winnipeg. I wouldn't expect him to slump very long here. And then you're feasibly getting, look, I've talked about Crosby, Malkin, Gensel, and Letang. That's 4 parts of a 5-man power play unit that, like I said, should just absolutely dominate the Coyotes tonight. It's a one-team stack for me tonight, but it'll pay off if they do what they're supposed to, which is dominate the Arizona Coyotes.
Paul, we didn't see it, but we heard the chuckles.
If Arizona wins this game, my Twitter's going to be really busy tonight. I'll just say that. But I will say Mike Matheson of the Penguins is a guy that we haven't named yet among the Penguins players that AJ's considering. He's the cheapest one. $3,400 is his price tag. He's got 6 points and 11 shots on goal, as well as a number of blocks in his last 4 games. So he's chipping in as well. It could be a real sneaky good value play on DFS. But I'm going to the Carolina defense for a pair of guys here that are also in the low end of the board. I'll be needing the low end because I'm going to be stacking some expensive guys up front. Brady Shea, 10 points in his last 10 games played, reemerging as a consistent contributor in the Carolina mix, only $3,800, but Jacob Slavin might be the best value play among the choices here. Chipping in offensively with 7 points in his last 10 games played, adding 23 blocks. That's for an average of almost 12 DK points per game in his last 10. That's outstanding value for his low price tag of $4,300 tonight.
Well, let's keep going with value, and we need to be quick here with this last one for you guys, but one great value that stands out to you here. Paul.
I'm going to go with Jeff Skinner. He's scoring at a rate that's almost reminiscent of the totals that earned him his current bloated contract that AJ and I have really maligned over the last couple of years as the worst value in the last 2 seasons among salary cap issues. And he scored 7 goals along with 3 helpers and 30 shots on goal in his last 10 games played. I think he's the best value play on the board tonight.
AJ?
I'll go with 2 players that Pete mentioned. I think they're great takes. Casey Middlestat returning to the lineup, 2,500. Huge steal for a guy that's probably going to get second line center role. And then Ryan Nugent-Hopkins at 4,500 comes in, probably going to be on the third line, but should get power play minutes with the 2 top guns there in Edmonton. I think both these guys are great plays coming off of injury.
What do you say, Pete?
Definitely on board with that price for Nugent-Hopkins. That's too good to pass up right now. And then, for in general, I think Quinn Hughes, his price, I know that Vancouver's missing some guys, but 5,100 for an elite defenseman like that certainly stands out as a value pick for me in a rivalry game. And Edmonton's running guns, so Quinn Hughes will try to keep track of them defensively and also move and push the pace forward. So, yeah, Quinn Hughes is a no-brainer for me at 5,100. And I also like Brady Shea with 10 points in his past 10 games for the Hurricanes, like Paul said.
I can't believe nobody mentioned Zach Parise. You think you know somebody. I mean, get a third liner. He's $2,500, second power play unit. Guys, I'm going to come back to you tomorrow or whenever it is that we have you here next and try and break all of this down. We thank you for being here with us. Best of luck to everybody tonight, obviously. The sweat is not done. We got golf talk on the other side. Got about 10 minutes to burn here, and what better way to do it than a little golf talk? We got Reid T. Fowler, Jeff Ulrich, a couple of DraftKings contributors, and of course, Len Hochberg. Great to see you, Len, courtesy of his friends at RotoWire and our pals too. Just had a couple of them with us. Guys, PGA Tour chase or fade here that we got coming up. We're going to agree or disagree with some of the following things about, of course, this upcoming Farmers Insurance Open at Torrey Pines in California, San Diego specifically. So, Reid, we'll begin with you. 6 of the top 10 golfers in the world rankings, they're teeing it up, obviously, at Torrey Pines, including the world's number 1, Jon Rahm. Rahm comes in $11,200. He is pricey. Chase or fade Rahm is your favorite play here north of 10K.
Yeah, this one's going to be tough. I think the price tag on Rahm is actually too inexpensive. It's too cheap with what he's able to do at Torrey Pines specifically. And he dominates this course, this area of California at Torrey Pines. And San Diego is, like he's mentioned it, his second home. So I don't mind if you want to pay up. But you talk about guys like JT Hideki. DJ hasn't played yet this season, but he does extremely well in California. And Xander Schauffele, he came up a runner-up, right? I know I just did the Jeff Ulrich where I mentioned everybody in that range, but I'll chase Jon Rahm at the top because I think a lot of people are going to look at what he did last week and say, maybe he's not there just yet, but this guy dominates San Diego.
All right, so Jeff, now you need to mention everyone, but give me your favorite.
Disrespectful. Reid is right. Rahm is too cheap again. I mean, he was too cheap last week, but the putter just didn't get hot. It's not like he played that badly. He was right there, still a top 20 finish, and now he comes to his favorite track ever in Torrey Pines. I get that the field is more elite, but it does feel like a spot where people are just going to be talking themselves out of using Jon Rahm in big fields, and I'm not even sure if his ownership is going to get to the point where you need to worry about it too much. I mean, look, you can make great balanced lineups here, and I think, again, that's probably just going to draw a little bit of ownership away from Jon Rahm. But realistically, this is the number 1 player in the field by a pretty wide margin at this point. JT, when he gets hot, is great. Hideki's playing well, but like Jon Rahm's the best player in the world. He's not really priced, like there is that big a gap. So you're getting a really good price on him. You have a spot where the field is probably going to be inclined to make all these fancy balanced lineups. Yeah, you should probably just roster Jon Rahm. He's a little bit too cheap here.
All right, Len, so we got a couple people chasing Rahm. What do you think north of 10K, 11-2?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Reid and Jeff said, that, 11-2 is a very fair price for a top guy on the board. Doesn't seem we see the 11-7s, 11-9s that we used to in the past few years. I mean, maybe just the fields are too good and the guys are too balanced and stuff. My big argument against Jon Rahm is that if you play Jon Rahm, you'll have to probably dip into the 6,000s. And I'm having a lot of trouble really identifying guys in this quality field in the 6,000s who I really feel good about. So I think Jon Rahm is a great play, but just be mindful that if you do that, you're going to have to go elsewhere to fill out your lineup with some guys toward the bottom.
Okay, so we've been talking about guys that are more than 10K. Let's go just sub 10K here and stay with you, Len. Of course, a DraftKings favorite, Bryson DeChambeau. He's 9,900. Didn't play a couple weeks ago. He pulled out of the Sony Open with, of course, that wrist injury. How we feel about him going into this one here?
Oh, Bryson, DraftKings' very own Bryson DeChambeau. He played Torrey Pines. He played the Farmers a few years ago. He didn't make either cut. That's not really on my radar. That was 4 or 5 years ago. He was leading the U.S. Open in June, and then Brysoned himself, and he ended up 26th. In a perfect world, he really is a perfect fit for this course, but something always seems to happen, and it's really hard to wrap your arms around that. So I don't know, maybe if you're really looking to separate yourself and go for the big hit in a tournament game or a GPP, or, maybe he's the play, but in a cash game, maybe for the more conservative player, maybe Bryson DeChambeau isn't for you this week.
Reid, is Bryson for you this week in that 9K range?
I mean, everybody knows where I'm going here. It is
Yes.
the easiest thing.
Yes.
$9,100. It's a one Tony fee now. If there's 1 week, and I'll keep this quick, if there's 1 week to play Tony, it's this week. He putts masterfully, and his around the green game here is great. He just has such a good track record here. So give me Tony.
See, Reid, went and M. Night Shyamalan me. I thought he was going to go Bryson because they're good friends and all, Jeff.
No, man. No.
I mean,
Switch it up. The village
Tony
style.
Finau's putts so well here, he's never won. I mean, that's interesting.
Runner-up finish, not too bad last year.
Look, the question was about Bryson, not Tony Finau. I mean, coming on, the thing that worries me is just the wrist issue. I mean, look, Bryson is a guy who just obviously smashes that driver all week, and if there's injuries piling up now coming to a place like Torrey Pines, I personally think that's enough to have just like a little bit of worry. Bryson is a very well priced here. I mean, he leads the field in birdie or better percentage. Like for DFS, that is a stat that matters. I mean, even if he finishes T26 again or something and he just racks up a ton of eagles and birdies, I mean, that's fine, especially on a place where I like Torrey Pines where there's just not that many scoring chances available. So I think Bryson is like a very good value here. But I think it was Len who said it. Like he's very volatile. I mean, this has been a tough spot for him. And obviously now we have like this wrist thing to factor in. And it's PGA. We don't get like a ton of injury updates here. We just get mentions from the players. That's all we really have to work off here. Bryson's really volatile this week, but he is underpriced. I mean, this is not a player, in my opinion, with his, like I said, the way he produces for DFS, that should be ranked under 10,000 in this field. So, take that for what you will. Reid is right. Like the safer play, if you're doing cash games, 50-50s, is to load up on guys like Tony Finau and Mark Leishman here. But man, GPPs, like I think a lot of people are going to be scared off of Bryson. I think he's underpriced there at 9,900.
Well, and to Jeff, your point, there's so many players that you can play in the $9,000 range, like all of them, right? You can make a really good argument about.
Moose, what about the 8K range? Pretty interesting here because you have Patrick Reid, $8,700, of course, defending champ, blew away the competition last year, 5-stroke win, which was the largest of his career. How do we feel about him, returning to the scene, so to speak, and trying to take down this tournament again?
Yeah, I'm just not sure if like Reid is quite like in terms of form, like really as sharp as he was at this time last year. I mean, he dealt with the pneumonia thing back last fall. He looked okay, like in a couple starts, but I mean, last fall, but the Hero Challenge and stuff, but that's not a real event. He hasn't really looked that sharp the last two events. Reid has to be so sharp around these greens and with the putter because he doesn't have the distance or the ball striking of the other top players. I just don't think he's there yet in his preparation. So he's a player I don't mind fading at all. I don't mind going back to Corey Connors at 8,800, but realistically, the guy I wrote up this week is Maverick McNeely. I think everything fits well for this guy. His ball striking is way up over his last two starts. He's a West Coast player. He just about won in Napa Valley on POA greens. Very similar kind of style setup, a little bit easier, but similar par 72 setup at Silverado. And I mean, he grew up around here. So Maverick McNeely playing very well, high-end putter too. That's where I want to go in the 8K range here. There's a few other players you could look to, but McNeely at 8,200, I think he's a really good value there.
Len, chase or fade Patrick Reid being your favorite play in the $8,000 range?
Yeah, is spot on. Reid is just not where he was a year ago at this time. I think he had only one top 10 in the entire second half of 2021, if we want to exclude the Hero, and I do. And that was in Bermuda, of all places. So really not in form. And that was long before the illness. So, yeah, I 8,500 Matthew Wolff. I was big on Matthew Wolff last week, and he had finished me by 9:30 on Thursday morning. So it's a little hard to jump back on board when that happens, but I really think he's a good fit this week. He was 21st here a couple of years ago. We know he hits the ball far, and he's a pretty good scrambler as well. So in that range, that's who I'm looking at, certainly more than Patrick Reid.
Well, Reid T. Fowler did all this Reid slander. It has to be rubbing you the wrong way. How are you feeling about
I
Patrick
am not
Reid?
in as good a form this week as I was last year at this time. So
I totally agree.
Right, exactly. Too much crazy football. But no, look, I mean, both of these guys mentioned the two other players that I wanted to talk about in Mav McNeely and Matt Wolff. But the other guy is Max Homa, the guy that I wrote up in my article. And I think when you take a look at from a California tilt or slight perspective, he's one of the best, right? He loves this area, this part of the country. He grew up in Los Angeles. But sans that, you take a look at two of his three wins at Quail Hollow and then at Genesis. Both have that similar style setup of this course, right? The traditional tee to green setup. It's going to be Max Homa, if not those two other guys that the guys mentioned.
All right, we need a slate-approved pick, and Reid will go right back to you. Who's your favorite to win this thing?
Well, I mean, again, Tony Finau is my favorite to win this one, but I'm going to give you a long shot who I think can contend here, Cam Davis. Take a look at the driver and what he can do and his experience on these type of courses. I think he's set up for a good week, but if not him, give me Tony Finau.
Len, who's going to take down the Farmers Insurance Open?
Well, I'm not going to be as bold as Reid and go. I'm going to be a little bit more chalky. But yeah, I do like Tony Finau. I think he's a good fit this week, and certainly at 9,100. Last year he was 10-7, finishes second, and somehow he loses $1,600. But my pick this week is Xander Schauffele. For years, he just could not play this course well, and who knows why. It was his home track. But he finally figured it out last year. He tied for second behind Patrick Reid. He's a great long iron player. We know that's one of the things you need to do well this week. He hasn't won officially, outside the Olympics, since the 2019 Tournament of Champions. I look for Xander to finally get it done this week.
And Moose, what do you think, John Rahm?
I kind of like going to Xander too. John Rahm is just feels too easy. I like Xander as a pick as well. McNeely is kind of my dark horse. I think he's a very good top 10 bet too.
All right, very good. And we thank our golf experts, of course, kind enough to join us most every day, practically. It's good to see them talking about one thing or another. We appreciate all of you joining us here on The Sweat for the last hour. Catch the replay a little bit later on if you missed anything, because all of it will still apply for quite a while. We've got Madden simulations on the DraftKings YouTube and Twitch channels coming your way beginning at noon with the defending real-life champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are now out and taking on the Washington football team. And of course, on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter a little bit later on, we will have the slate. I'll be back. Meiselman will be back. Shirag Hero will join us. A lot of NBA talk here on a